Thank you, everybody. It's a privilege to be with you today, and I'm really excited to share the next installation in our Daring to Dream series. Today we're going to be looking at Joseph from the book of Genesis. And this is a guy who was given a huge God-sized dream. So we're going to pull some lessons out from him, and I'm really excited about it. So I'm going to jump straight in. Let me paint a picture of this young man's childhood. He was the littlest son of a pretty dysfunctional family. One dad, 4 mums, 2 wives, 2 concubines, 11 sons and 1 daughter. And the family narrative is full of lost love and deception and fertility challenges and a whole lot of bickering. I don't know if that's something that you can identify with. I don't know if a dysfunctional family is something that you can think, yeah, I can find myself in that story. What we learn in chapter 37, as soon as we jump in the first 4 verses, we learn that Joseph is 17 at this time. He's a bit of a tattletale snitch. He is his father's favourite, and his brothers hate him. And then in verse 5, Joseph has his God-sized dream. Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." The brothers did not take this well. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. This did not deter Joseph. When he had his second God-sized dream, he shared it with his brothers again. Then he had another dream and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream. And this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his fathers rebuked him and he said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" So God-sized dreams indeed. Perfect for our series. But the story very quickly moves from Joseph's brothers rebuking and feeling a bit disgruntled very quickly to plotting to murder him, but settling for selling him into slavery, which, slightly better, not much. It's the start of a most unexpected journey. This is a young man who's been given a God-sized dream. And then he rapidly finds himself moved as far away from it as humanly possible by being sold into slavery. And that is just the start of the roller coaster story. Because the next time we meet Joseph, he has been sold into slavery and has become to be owned by a man named Potiphar. And the interesting thing is that as soon as he went there, things started going super well for Potiphar. Chapter 39 and verse 3 tells us, "His master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord gave him success in everything he did." So Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of the whole household, of the entire household, and pretty much everything that he owns. And things start going super well because we can see that the Lord is with Joseph. But then, boom, Potiphar's wife takes a fancy to Joseph and she starts to pursue him. And he's rebuking. He's saying, no. She doesn't give up. She keeps going. No. Until one day it comes to a head and she grabs him by the cloak and tells him to come to bed with her. And he just flees, just runs away, leaves her holding the cloak. And when Potiphar comes in and sees her holding the cloak, she makes up a story and says, "Joseph tried to rape me." And so Potiphar, incensed, throws Joseph in with the king's prisoners. And so this dreamer of the God-sized dream has now gone from slave to unjustly accused prisoner. But then, a familiar story. In chapter 39, verse 20, "But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favour in the eyes of the prison warden." So the Lord was with Joseph. And so you might think that things are starting to look up, and for a little while it looks like they are. While Joseph's in jail, the cupbearer and the baker from the Pharaoh, from the king, get in strife, end up in jail. And they have some dreams and get a bit distressed because they don't know what they mean. So Genesis 40 tells us, when Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they said, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." And so they tell him, he interprets them, and he says to the cupbearer, "Great news. Your dream means that you're going to be restored to your place." Not so good for the baker. He says that means he's going to be killed. But if we stick with the cupbearer, he says, you're going to be restored. And when you are, don't forget about little old Joseph stuck here in prison, please. Great news. It comes to pass. The cupbearer is restored. Everything is going well. And then in a really sad line of the Bible, chapter 40, 23, it says, "The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him." And so once again, Joseph finds himself having done great things, been trusted with much, had all that he touches blessed by God, and yet he is still there. He is still waiting for his God-sized dream to come to pass. He's had the dream, been sold into slavery, risen up, been accused of rape, jailed, risen up, had everything he said come to pass, been forgotten. What a roller coaster. But it brings us to our first lesson to learn from Joseph, which is to walk in God-sized dreams, we need to wait well. And what we've seen so far is a dream for Joseph from God, showing him as this really important person, and then immediately moved as far away from that as humanly possible. But what we learn is that in waiting well, in waiting for that dream to come to pass, he lived a righteous life. He did the right thing with Potiphar's life. He worked hard. He got on with what was in front of him. He was a man of integrity, and God blessed that. Perhaps not in the way that Joseph might have liked, certainly not in a way that brought Joseph any glory, but God was with him while he waited. We don't see Joseph's tempted just to sit there, opt out, wait for it all to come to pass. But at the same time, we don't see Joseph manoeuvring, manipulating, pushing, making it happen. His example is that we should wait well with God. He's been through the ringer, and yet we see him bringing glory to God as he waits for that God-sized dream to come to pass. And at this point in the story, we don't know what's about to happen yet, but we see two things already. That while Joseph waits well, the presence of God is with him and the favour of God is with him. And we see time and time again, Joseph trusted with things, him do them well, be granted that favour because the presence of God is with him. So the first question that I want to ask you this morning is, what would it look like for you to wait well? Whether you're here with us in the building, whether you're at home, what does it mean to wait well? Maybe you're waiting for that God-sized dream that you've been promised to come to pass. Maybe you're waiting for the God-sized dream to be revealed to you. Whatever it is that you're waiting for, what would it look like if you were to wait well and follow Joseph's example? There's a second part to this lesson, which is that while we're waiting well, we also need to be ready. When it's time to act, you must move. And we see this in the next part of Joseph's story. So if he's still in jail and the cupbearer has forgotten him and 2 years pass, ouch. The king then has a dream, and then the king has another dream. And the important thing to know at this time in Egypt is that dreams were really important. They were seen as the gods speaking to people. And so a dream interpreter was actually paid pretty well if you did a good job. If not, dungeon, we've heard about that. So 2 dreams as well meant that it was a really important message. People took that really seriously. So the king's looking around for someone who can interpret this dream. There's no one around, no one can do it. Then light bulb moment, the cupbearer goes, oh yeah, I remember this guy from 2 years ago. So Joseph's called up from the prison, brought before the king. Chapter 41:15. Pharaoh says to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. So when it's time to act, you must move. Joseph continues to rely on God, but he's brave enough to step into that opportunity. So he hears Pharaoh's dream, and sure enough, God gives Joseph the wisdom to interpret it. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. Gutsy! Out of jail, shower and a shave, brought before the Pharaoh, and he really takes his chance. But then he goes one step further and he lines a plan of action out for the Pharaoh. He says, you should put someone in charge, someone that can collect a fifth of everything, store it up, so that when 7 years of famine comes, it'll all be in reserve. Pharaoh's like, nice plan. I know. Verse 41 tells us, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. How's that for the end of a day? From prisoner to prime minister in an afternoon. Sounds like the title of a terrible self-help book. But Joseph had waited well, and when it was time to act, he moved. He was brave and bold after being patient and humble. And it reminds me of my colleague from work, whose name is Ben, and he is our Experiential Learning manager at our school, and he is a Christian guy who firmly believes that transformational experiences in God's creation can really change a young person's life. And so he just spends his days waiting for the principal to give him the nod. He's just ready to go. And he's learnt that he can push and annoy and badger. He can complain and argue and be a general, unpleasant human. Or he can plan and be ready and use his gifts in other ways. When the principal gives him the nod, whips out the proposal, he is ready to go. And God uses him mightily. So we need to wait well. And then when it's time to act, we must move. So fast forward. Joseph's 30 at the time. He's put in charge of the whole of Egypt. And at this time, though, Joseph's God-sized dream has still not yet come to pass. But Pharaoh's does. So there's 7 years of abundance followed, and Joseph enacts his plan. He stores up all the food. Then there's 7 years of famine. Joseph opens up the storehouses and sells the grain to everyone, the Egyptians and to the rest of the world, because the Bible tells us the famine was bad everywhere. Everywhere. Including where Joseph's brother and father were still living. And they were hungry. Word reached that there was food in Egypt, and so the brothers get sent to buy some. They get there, Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him because he was 17 and being sold to slaves the last time that they saw him. So Joseph gets a bit worried that they're spies and they want to harm him, and so he makes a bit of a plan. There's a few chapters in there about him moving them around. Eventually, the family come back and they really need food. Joseph has them at his house for a meal, and the brothers think they're meeting with the prime minister to pretty much beg for food. Genesis 43:26 tells us, when Joseph came home, they, the brothers, presented to him the gifts they had brought into the house, and they bowed down before him to the ground. He asked them how they were, and then he said, how is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living? They replied, your servant, our father, is alive and well. And they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. Are we all nodding knowingly and raising our eyebrows? The dream has come to pass. Joseph decides to do the big reveal. Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to the brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." So this brings us to our second lesson from Joseph, which is to walk in God-sized dreams, we need to live in forgiveness. If Joseph had given in to unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, he would not have been able to fulfill that dream. Now, he had every right to, every human right to. He had been abused and rejected by his family. He'd suffered false accusations and unjust punishment at Potiphar's hands. And he'd been unfairly forgotten and overlooked after doing God's work in the prison. But what Joseph's example shows us is that these offences, we can let them overcome us, or we can overcome them. We must live a life of forgiveness if we want to walk in these God-sized dreams. Now, this might not be a small thing for you. I don't know your hurts. I don't know what's been done to you. So please don't take this as a flippant throwaway line. But what I do know is that we live on this side of the cross, that the work has been done, that we can live in that forgiveness. Colossians 3:12-14 in the Message says, "So chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Be even-tempered, content with second place, quick to forgive an offence. Forgive as quickly and completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic, all-purpose garment. Never be without it." And so Joseph shows us that to walk in God-sized dreams, we must live in forgiveness. Now, we had the word this morning about new beginnings. Maybe this is your new beginning today. Maybe you've had some unforgiveness in your life that you found really hard. That is God's love and care for you today. He wants you to live free of it, for yourself, for your relationship with him, for your relationship with others around you, and so that you can walk in these God-sized dreams. So maybe that's you today. Back to the story. Once Joseph had revealed himself, the brothers wept and hugged and talked, and Pharaoh heard all about it. He said, "Bring your family here, all of them. Bring your father. I will give you good farming land." The end of the chapters of Genesis outline how this family was the beginning of the 12 tribes of Israel, which is the next part of God's story, which continues on and on and on to us here today. So that's the final lesson to draw out. The God-sized dream is always about God's work. It's never about me. God is always at work bringing people back to himself. He's always looking for people to join in that story. God's story is one of redemption. He's always at work bringing his people back to himself. And this is where we're invited to live in these truths of God. God is delightfully personal, and he's involved in the minutiae of my life. And it's not about me, and I am part of a much bigger story. Those things are true at the same time. God is big, and he is always at work. Up until recently, my husband Phil and I and our kids, we lived in Elizabeth South, serving as urban missionaries. And our God-sized dream was that God would transform the community of Elizabeth South and bring people to himself. It's a bit of a big and crazy dream, and it hasn't come to pass yet, but we're confident that our chapter there is part of that journey. The first couple of years that we were there, it was just tough. It was just hard. And then after a little while, we felt that it was a God idea to set up a breakfast program on a Sunday morning at our local church. And so we did that. We prayed and we got there and we set up the tables and we had some music playing and we were ready with prayer. And the very first week, 8 people came. And then the next week, 4 people came. And then the next week, no people came. And I remember saying to God, didn't you tell us to do this? And God was like, yeah. But nobody's, should we just keep doing this? Yeah. And so we did. And over time, people came. And in the end, by the time we handed it over, 100 meals a week were being made. And through that, people started to come to church, people made decisions, people made relationship, people started serving their community. But when I look back, I can actually see that this was just a really small piece of the bigger story that I was involved in, and then the bigger story that God's still doing there. It'd be easy to get caught up in but there's nobody here and I put on tablecloths. God is inviting us to be a part of his work. The irony of it was that for most of the years, I was in the kitchen flipping eggs and cooking bacon, and I don't like to cook. But the thing is, it's not about me. It's not about me breakfasting with people and leading them to the Lord in prayer. It's about joining with God to be part of the bigger story of what God is doing. We see this in the way that Joseph always gives credit to God. But more importantly, the God-sized dream that Joseph had way back in the beginning with the bowing and the prostrating was never about Joseph being king, about him being worshipped and honoured. It was never about Joseph at all. It was about Joseph being in a place to be able to do God's gracious work for the good of the people. God-sized dreams are always about God's work, and we get to join in. Our part to play is to make sure that we're waiting well, we're living a life of forgiveness and understanding that the God-sized dream is always about God's work and not about me. The band's going to play an awesome song, another Inner Fire that we were singing before. But I really want to ask you to consider your response. Out of those three things, what is the one that God is speaking to you about today? Is he asking you to consider how you're waiting at the moment, whether that be for the dream to come or for the dream to come to pass? Is it about the fact you've made all this stuff about you? Or is it that today is a new beginning? That today's the day you're going to step into that life of forgiveness? If there's something that you want to respond to in that, I really encourage you to do it during this song. Really encourage you to stand and sing with us and consider that whatever that challenge looks like for you, there is another in the fire standing there with you. Another person ready who has done it all. Today could be your new beginning, whatever that looks like for you. Can I invite you to stand? We'll sing together. Thanks, guys.